today. So let's see, there it goes. So hi, and welcome to today's guest talk with Elizabeth Kaiser from Singing Frogs Farm. Um, so I'll just start with a brief intro. Elizabeth and her husband, Paul, who own Singing Frogs Farm in Sebastopol, California, met while serving in the Peace Corps in the Gambia. And Elizabeth has a master's in the science of nursing and a master's in public health from Johns Hopkins University. Um, she and her husband Paul moved up to Sonoma County, I believe in 2000. They owned Singing Frogs starting in 2007. And I first heard of Elizabeth and Paul and Singing Frogs when I was in grad school at Berkeley doing my research on urban agroecology. And some of my collaborators got a grant to sort of replicate the Singing Frogs method of biointensive no-till farming at a research plot at UC Berkeley. And then I think I met Elizabeth when I came out to her farm for a climate resilience course for farmers that Mesa was hosting a couple years ago. And we sort of reconnected recently when I started working for Terra and was looking to bring more regenerative ag and farming presence to our core course on climate change. So it's just really a pleasure to welcome you for this talk, Elizabeth, and thank you so much for taking the time this morning.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to this. Definitely wanted to be out. The sun's warming things up a little bit. We got really quite cold last night, probably about 20 degrees where I'm standing right now, and you're looking behind me down the farm, probably about 16 down there. I didn't actually check the thermometer down there. I would love this to be the most useful to all of you, and so I'm on my phone, so I'm not able to see chat. Lainey is going to help, and anybody else can also help. But I'd love to sort of take this in any direction that anybody would like to, and we can definitely move locales on the farm to see something that's happening, or look at the soil or anything like that.
Yeah, so if folks have any questions or initial, hopes or dreams for this session, feel free to unmute yourself, speak them out loud, or put them in the chat, and I can read them out.
Great.
Yeah, and just to get a sense where people are coming from, yeah, we have our fellows and our instructors from India and from the US, UK. I think Varun is in the Netherlands right now, and so yeah, we're a pretty globally representative group right now. So that's fun.
And if I don't hear any questions right now, what I would just sort of start diving into is today. And, as Lainey just mentioned, we're having a pretty large climactic event that's, been happening and happening. We have a huge storm. It doesn't look like it right now that's forecasted for today. And I just sort of talk about how our farm responds to that. So that's one place that I can start. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. And then Liam also wrote in the chat just a little more context on why and how you got started with your farm and what you're growing right now in the background.
Okay, great. I will do that. So we are a Mediterranean climate, but it's definitely our winter right now. And, coming from, Lainey gave my background in public health. My husband's background was in agroforestry, but we always, we worked a lot together. We definitely wanted to start a farm. We didn't really know how, and we were able to get this piece of property and just started playing around with it a little bit. And as we were growing stuff, and the amount of community connection that we were getting was just tremendous. And I think that led us on. My husband's background really led him to wanting to work with agroforestry, putting in hedgerows, bringing in native pollinators, native insects. And as we were doing that, it was like, okay, well, we've got to make money farming too. So we were trying to farm the most organic way we could. And yet by doing that, we were seeing that we were killing life. And what I mean by doing that is we were doing your typical put in a cover crop in the winter and then till, and then put in some crops in the summer, and then till a couple more times every time you want to transition or before you want to put in a cover crop. And so we were building up life on one side and killing life on the other. And just those two things not going together really had us thinking like, okay, we want to do a different way. We met in West Africa, saw people working without a tractor. We're like, okay, let's get this tractor out of the system. Let's see if we can expand our seasons some more, so we can grow more food for ourselves, our community, have more income coming in. And so it was really through a process of observation, and what we had seen outside of the United States. The United States has some pretty awful agricultural practices, and we were seeing that around us, but thankfully we had sort of a bigger context, of him doing his master's in Costa Rica and the two of us having lived for a couple of years in West Africa. So I think that's sort of really what took us here. And then uh, as we were really starting to start our no-till intensive, we didn't even know what to call it. We weren't even calling it no-till or anything like that. We were able to go to an international climate and ag conference, just because climate was definitely important to us. And that's where we first started to see the parts about like what tillage was doing in terms of, really destroying the soil and putting carbon up in the air where it's not belonging, and how through positive practices we could bring that down. That really lit us on fire and started to put together a couple of the pieces saying, hey, we didn't like these industrialized practices. We liked more indigenous practices, that whether it was from here or Africa or Central America, bringing those in. And guess what? They're working. They're working. Okay, let's see if we can bring in more science and understand that more. And that really led us into what we've been doing more recently. And what we've been doing more recently is just intensive cropping as much of the year as we can, partially because we want to feed ourselves, feed our community, make money, keep our employees employed, but also because we want to continue having green photosynthesizing plants feeding the soil microbes throughout the year. Yeah, I mean, I could go down that. I saw somebody had a question on challenges. Sometimes they pop up for me.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah. And so, yeah, and I think so. So, Liam, your question was kind of what's going on now. Definitely some kale stalks in the background. You want to just point out a few other things
Very
so people can.
specifically, very specifically, if things are really frosty. I've got a crop of some spinach here. I've got some kale behind there. I've actually got some pretty messy beds behind there, with some chards and so forth. I don't know if you can see far down in the fields. We've got one person working up close and another people doing wheelbarrows. And I'm also happy to move. I just tried to get someplace where I had a decent view of the farm. So I'm gonna move so you guys have a different background.
Cool.
And so we're growing year round. It definitely does decrease a little bit in the winter time. We have 2 year-round farmers markets, and over the course of the year, that's about 40% of our food goes to that. We do a year-round CSA, but over the winter, we just do that every other week. And part of the problem is, the frost and the cold, as well as the rain, definitely slows things down. But more than anything else, it's the sun. We need the sun to photosynthesize, to grow our plants. And so they just grow so much more slowly in the winter. And so it's more challenging work, a little bit less profitable also. But the fact that you're keeping it going throughout the entire year overall makes it more profitable, because you keep your community fed and they see you as their food source throughout the year.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. So yeah, you were right. There was a question that came in about challenges that you faced first when starting up the farm and now while managing the farm at its current scale. And then Xenia had a quick question about tillage and just why, sort of your thoughts on why it's so widely used when it's proven to decrease soil quality.
Okay, so let's do the challenges question first. When we were starting, one major challenge was just information and knowing what we were gonna do. A lot of the information was heading us towards, tillage in an organic system. And that wasn't, what we wanted to do. I'm just staring into the sun. Let's change that. So that was definitely a challenge, finding the appropriate information. And right now, there's actually a lot more good information out there. Um, the challenge, people. There are some farms like us that are intensive, no-till, regenerative, that are really small, like a half acre up to an acre, that are just a couple, and then they don't have to worry about necessarily labor, but they have to worry about their own labor and taking times off and taking time for them. For us, we're large enough. We have about 5 full-time equivalents in January, and that goes up to about 10 in August. And so keeping all those people going, and keeping them trained and all of that, that is our biggest challenge. But people, you know that's a wonderful challenge, to be working with people. So appreciate that. Lainey, what was the other question? Got
The other
focused
question
on
is
that.
about soil tillage and just why it's been
Why?
so common when it's proven to be so destructive to soil quality. And then Larissa asked a related question about what do you see as the biggest barrier to spreading no-till methods to more farms?
Absolutely. Okay, so why do people till? Tools are sexy. I will say that. People love tools, and you can get on a tractor and you can affect a ton of change. And we've been at conferences that have been like really like sort of larger scale no-till, where some of the big heads who are making big changes, they will sort of quietly joke during, yeah, wasn't tillage fun? Yeah, it's sort of a bummer we don't get to do that. We don't understand it, but it's like you get out there on this huge old tractor and you get to just like go from this, cover crop to this entirely clean slate. So I think a lot of it is just the way that we do, um, the way we like to think about, business and or, something like that. It's like, Mother Nature is really super complicated. She's got so many things going on, so many different parts. And we want to replicate that. And we don't even know how, but in those tillage models, it's like, let's boil it down to a really simple equation where we can grow food, make money, something like that. Let's start with a clean slate. So how are we going to do a clean slate? We're going to till it, get rid of those weeds, get rid of the snakes that are in there, get rid of, also all the biology, which they don't, and then we're just going to put in what we want. We're going to put in exactly the plants we want, and we're going to put in, then the amendments that it wants. We're going to put in the fertilizers for those weeds that are starting to grow. We're going to put in herbicides. So it's this easy equation. But yet life isn't easy. I mean, Mother Nature isn't easy. She's complex, and she has positive externalities, and she's beautiful. So I think tillage works when you're not appreciating that. Lainey, apparently I can only hold one question in my head at a time.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's great. This is why I'm here as my role as moderator. But yeah, and so Larissa's related question was like, what are some of the biggest barriers to spreading no-till methods to more farms? And I mean, and I think that's an interesting question because I think like you're saying, it's still not the norm, but at the same time, there's been like this large increase in no-till industrialized farms that are maybe still applying pesticides to kill weeds, but they're not tilling because they're trying, like their soil is turning to dust and blowing away. So there is like, on one hand, I think more no-till in even big farms, but yeah. So what do you see as like spreading this in a more holistic, like Mother Nature appreciation sense to more farms, maybe?
Right, absolutely. And I don't even know that, no-till is the word that we want to use, because you're right, that industrialized no-till, that's been going on for a while. I mean, the majority of our grain crops in the United States, as well as in the world, are being done through no-till. And that was through, an effort to, really stop erosion, and things like that. But what it means is that when you're not tilling, then they're bringing in other tools, primarily herbicides like glyphosate, Roundup, and things like that, to do the work, so they can still be on the large scale. What are some of the barriers? Knowledge definitely is, and that was one of my challenges that I brought up before there. I'm just trying to give you guys different views again. Let's see. Not have you look into the sun though. So I definitely think knowledge is, and that is changing very rapidly as we, more books are coming out on it right now. There's actually a lot of podcasts, um, no-till podcasts. There's and just people sharing what they're doing. I would still say that their tools are still sexy. And so even within that no-till market gardener movement, there are a lot of people who are still trying to use a rototiller or a tilther or a mechanical compost spreader and things like that. And those can definitely be helpful. Um, but I think I don't think it's good to have any sort of dogma like only no-till is good, and because there's bad no-till, or all tools are bad, all tools are good. I think um, just being really thoughtful to what are our end goals, having healthy soil to the best of our ability of understanding both scientifically as well as observationally. There's so much you can
Hmm.
observe. When a system is
Hmm.
healthy, you can tell, you can taste it, you can
Hmm.
smell it, you can see it.
Hmm.
Versus when a system is not, like I was saying before, when we were, when we were first starting, and we were killing life on one side and building it up on the other. We knew it, in our gut. So that
Hmm.
observation is really, really important.
Hmm.
So barriers, a huge barrier is access to land, honestly.
Hmm.
In
Hmm.
our area, we live north of San Francisco. The cost of land up here is really, really high. And then that gets translated to the cost of housing. Um, uh, that also, we're having a hard time, keeping farmers in this area because maybe they have access to land, but they can't live here because the cost is so high.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm gonna get to Varun and Hugh's question in a second, but just going along this thread of, like, you've mentioned a lot of challenges, which are really important to point out, and you've also alluded to, making a living doing this and science being a part of your process. So I'm wondering if you can touch a little bit more on, like, you all have been fairly successful in making a living as year-round farmers and, having fun while doing it, it seems to me. And you've also brought in a lot of science to back up what you're doing, and to know that you are building life in the soil. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit on the success side of farming as a business, and your soil, knowing that your soil is healthy, and like how you know that.
Okay. Knowing that our soil is healthy, I mean, first of all, one can do, and starting up, one probably should do some soil tests. Yes, chemical, but also definitely biological. Um, uh, Lainey, that was a huge question that you went from business to
Yeah.
soil.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, sorry.
So,
I was thinking about success. Success was my key word, and so like
okay, great.
obviously we track that with money, and we track that with like science in some ways. So I don't know. So either direction you want to go in. Sorry, it was a big question.
Okay, great. Diversity is really, really, really important to us. The industrialized agriculture, they're really, again, with that equation, focusing on, one crop and doing that one crop on many, many, many acres. And I would say that a huge part of our success is diversity. And that is diversity of crops, that is diversity of nutrients that we bring in when we're thinking about the soil. Obviously, there's so many different organisms in that soil and so much different life happening. Life begets life. And that also then goes to diversity of markets. I was sharing that, about 40% of our food goes to farmers market and about 40% to CSA. That leaves a little bit in the middle, which is like restaurants and things like that. So when something like COVID happens and the restaurants fall off the map, because they all have to close, we have other markets. And having relationships with people. So for us, being small, you can't compete with the big guys who are going through wholesalers and grocery stores and all of that sort of stuff. So having that connection with the end consumer, and they want that connection. We're all desiring more connection in life. So for us, that's been a large part of our success, is a diversity of markets, and the majority of that in a couple of different ways. CSA, where people sign up for at least half of a year to get a box of food every week from our farm. So that's a really intense relationship. or meeting them every week at the farmer's market and be like, here's a head of cauliflower. That's, $4. And here, this lettuce. And this week we have this. That's also a relationship. And that has sort of been the basis of our success, is those relationships within our community, feeding our community, knowing what they want, and so forth.
Yeah, awesome. That's great to hear. And that makes a lot of sense because COVID has been both really hard for a lot of businesses and I think an appreciation for
Right.
knowing where your food comes from. And a lot of people have been jumping at the chance to buy food directly from local sources and local farms. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's like if you have both streams, it's good.
Hey, Lainey, I'm going to
Okay,
direct for
so
a minute. May I direct for a minute?
okay,
Great.
of course.
Okay, so talking about keeping green living plants in the ground as often as possible throughout the year. Where we are right now, I've walked down the property down to the bottom of our property. We started way up that way. But down here in the winter, we're not able to grow quite as well, and partially because we can sometimes flood down here. Hey guys. So a lot of what we'll do is we'll go grow cover crops, and they may not even grow that tall. And you can see on these beds here, just past where Peter is shoveling compost, you can see cover crop. And at this point, we're thinking forward to the spring. I know it's still only January, but we get a real good jump start on that. This mix of cover crops, which is everything from a couple of different oats and rye and beans and things like that, didn't get very tall, but yet put a lot of roots in the ground. And now we're actually throwing compost on top of it. And then we're going to cover it with a black plastic. As we saw in these upper beds up here, they were just getting started to do that. And then we're going to let the decomposers come in and build that soil from the green photosynthesizing plants that we put in, the extra food and compost and carbon that we're adding through that. And we're going to let it sit for about a month. And then this is going to be beyond luscious soil for us to plant probably some brassicas, but maybe beets and other things in here. And I just wanted to share that because that is part of our work of today as we're getting ready for a very large rainstorm. And you may have seen a tractor moving back and forth behind me. Once the rain comes in, we will not be able to use the tractor for quite a while. So we're sort of planning for that. So just thought I would share.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. So let's see. So I'm going to go back to Varun's question about how does your farm affect the ecosystem around it? For example, streams, watershed, and vice versa.
Oh, okay, great. We'll walk to, actually, that's a little weird, pardon me. So ecosystem, and maybe this tripod isn't always the best. Let's see. If you can see behind me, you can see there's some crops, and then just beyond that, there's a whole bunch of bushes. And it is winter, so you're just seeing twigs. So this is a hedgerow, a little bit of agroforestry that we're able to do here in our climate. Super, super, super important for us. And I don't know if you can hear birds. We have quite a lot of birds this time of year. But those hedgerows we really put in, they are not in and of themselves specifically productive. In the sense that industrialized agriculture would think about them. But what they do for us is so tremendously much in the biology that they bring in, both above ground as well as below ground. They really help bring in a lot of the beneficial insects and pollinators. The varieties that we've chosen, they're Sonoma County, the majority of them are Sonoma County, which is where we live, native and pollinator friendly. And we've chosen them so that they flower at a variety of times throughout the season so that there are food sources for those insects as long through the year as possible. And that really means for us having that healthy habitat for our beneficial insects who have a longer lifespan and are going to be then going out into the field and eating the pest insects that are on the crops. So having that native biology that's here right next to where we're growing is super, super important for us. And that's something that was really drilled into Paul when he was studying in Costa Rica, and they were studying citrus orchards that were either very, very, very large or were contiguous with the national parks. And they would find that there was a huge decrease in pest incidents when they were right up next to a native habitat. And so we've tried to do that as much as possible by bringing in hedgerows throughout our fields. And usually what we do is they say that some of the beneficial insects will go up to 250 feet from a hedgerow out into your crop. And so we've actually said, well, we want it closer than that, because of course, you know, if you're hungry and there's food here, you're not going to go all the way over there. So we have them 120 feet. So they're spaced throughout the farm. Additionally, those are bringing in birds, snakes, which are a wonderful thing, because honestly, our biggest pest on the farm are rodents, because we don't till. In a tillage system, it would kill their burrows and things like that. And yet we don't have some of the mammalian predators to take care of those. And so having snakes is a really wonderful thing, but also some of the other habitat areas. And I'll actually walk down to some of our ponds. We are Singing Frogs Farm. We have a lot of ponds and a lot of croaking and singing. Having those and having sort of a wildlife area and having it contiguous to some neighbors and a creek is also very important, because it brings in coyotes and bobcats, not to a huge extent, but given that we are only 2 miles away from our town as the crow flies, you know, definitely important to us. So what we're looking at right now, these are our seasonal ponds. And so they will dry up in the summertime when we don't have rain. And you can see it's right up against our cropland. And I said, these are, here's the other one. I'm standing on a bridge right between them. And then there's another one back over here with some smaller fields beyond, and then a paddock for our goats. And then we've got some broccoli that's just finishing up over here, some more cover crop over there. And then I just did 360 for you. And these are seasonal ponds, so they're not year round. We also do have 3 ponds that are year round. And you know, these bring in a lot of life in terms of the birds, but also turtles and crawdads and river otters. And I gotta move for the tractor. There goes Paul. Okay, great.
Paul.
Did that answer the question?
Yes, Varun typed in thank you and follow up. Does that enable you to reduce / eliminate herbicide and pesticide use because of the kind of diverse life that you're cultivating on the farm?
We do not use any herbicides or pesticides, period. So yes, we did, when we were doing tillage in our 2nd year, we used a pesticide once. We have one pest here called a cucumber beetle. It looks like a lady beetle, except for it's green with little dots on it, and it can be quite ferocious. And through the act of doing tillage and really destroying the soil biology by doing that in some of our first years, we had pretty bad outbreaks of those cucumber beetles. It got to be so bad, and Paul and I didn't want to spray. We were out there at night, like squishing them with our fingers, which I know sounds sort of ridiculous, but we're like, well, let's see what we can do. I got like 7,000 of them, you know. And we're finally like, okay, this is just ridiculous. We don't, you know, and so we're talking to all the other farmers, and they're like, we're really sorry. You've got to use an organic pesticide. Like, you know, there's good organic ones that'll work and so forth. And so like with a lot of trepidation, we actually tried one once. And what we did is we sprayed it on an area. And then my husband also captured like 10 of these bugs, put them in a jar with a concentrated version of this, because you bought a concentrated version and then you watered it down, and shook up the jar and then put it on the kitchen counter. Well, like 3 of those 10 died pretty quickly, but then another 2 didn't look like they were doing fine. 5 of them, 2 days later, they were like swimming around in the stuff. So we're like, okay, what the heck? Okay, well, that was a fail. But then we went out to the beds that we had sprayed, and we found like dead lacewings and, lady beetles underneath the crop that we had sprayed. So it was the beneficial that we had sprayed, and that for us that we had killed, not the actual pest. And so that's what they sometimes will talk about, like a pesticide cycle, where if you spray, then you have to sort of continue spraying because you've gotten rid of your beneficials, you've gotten rid of the predators. They're the ones to go first, and they're the ones to come back last. And we
Mhm.
still continue to have some pest problems the first few years. We still have pest problems, but as those hedgerows really came to fruition, our pest problems have gone down tremendously. And we'll often talk to neighbor farmers, and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, aren't the this really bad? Aren't the this really bad this year?" And we're like, "Yeah, well, yeah, we see them, but our crops are surviving." And then also with the pests, the habitat below ground is so important. That soil and that feeding that soil biology, because most pests have some point of their life cycle that is in the soil. Most often it's the egg or larval stage. And if you've got a healthy soil biology, that also includes a lot of predators that are going to be eating those eggs and so forth. So you're not going to get a boom pest outbreak. It'll be more moderated, and then you've got more above ground beneficials taking care of those and so forth.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Great answer. And then a related question from Larissa, and I think Duncan asked about this earlier. So can a regenerative ag operation deliver zero fertilizer farming? And Larissa was saying, do you use any kind of organic fertilizers? How do you feed your plants? And I think you're in a
Absolutely.
great segue to answer that.
Well, you did just see the compost going on the beds, and I should move someplace quieter because Paul is driving back and forth here. Um, Let me just halt for a second. And in fact, I think I'll move because this will continue to be a problem. Um,
Sounds good.
So we definitely use compost. That's what you're hearing in the background. That's the tractor. The only thing we use the tractor for on our farm, and we're big enough, is the compost. So we're bringing it from the compost pile down to the fields, and then it goes into wheelbarrows, as you can see here, and then it goes out on the fields. And that is something that between crop transitions, about 75% of our crop transitions. And what I mean by that is we take out a cauliflower crop and we put in beets or something like that, that we would put on some compost. So that is
Mm.
definitely feeding our soil. It's bringing in a lot of carbon, so really feeding the biology, but definitely also bringing in nutrients. And we make about 50% of our own compost from the green manure from our fields, and then the other 50% we bring in from off the farm. And about half of that, so 25% of the total, is manure, and then the other half of that is from our municipal composting. And so that's a small amount. And so, like, here is a compost pile that is being built right now. You can see there's some Napa cabbage that we cleared
Mm.
yesterday. There's some weeds. There's some brassica stems and things like that. So we have our own piles. This is a pile down in the field. We have our main operation up by the barn. Um, but we're constantly making compost. We do use some fertilizers. We will use organic, um, a couple of different organic amendments. The primary one that we'll use is a chicken feather meal. And so it is, my breath. It is a product of chicken processing. It's important to us to not use something that is like mined or something like that, but is um, a byproduct of something else. We'll also bring in some calcium, and for that we will use a oyster meal. So it's a byproduct of
Mm.
oyster harvest. Um, and then occasionally we will use a little bit of rock dust. And that's just to bring in some micronutrients. And so what we'll do when we do a bed transition, like I said, take out a cauliflower and put in some beets, is we will cut it at the soil surface. And then if we're going to do the amendments, like I said, that's only about 75% of the time. If it was a long crop in there, if it is going to be a long crop or a heavy feeder going in there, or if the soil's not doing very well, we will do fertilizers and then compost on top of it and then trans back in. And I think a lot of people are wooed by a really wonderful idea that you don't need to bring in, you can have soil biology can do so much. And I think that needs more understanding. I think the soil biology can do a ton, and I'm really excited about, and it does do a ton. But for a farm that is productive and not huge in size, I do think that we need to bring things in. And because every single day, if I'm being a good farmer, I am exporting water and nutrients off of my property to my community to sell it to make a living, right? And so I can't, at that rate of constantly exporting all those nutrients, have the biology build it back up quite that quickly enough. And personally, we love the municipal compost. We had a really, really, really wonderful composter for years. He was pushed out due to bad politics. We're trying to get him back in a different way. But for us, that idea of municipal composting was wonderful in that we got to cycle our nutrients through our community. I'd sell somebody, some eggplant, they'd cut off the skin and it'd go into their compost along with their leaves from their yard, go to a municipal composter, be composted, and come back onto our farm in the form of nutrients. So keeping those nutrients in our community in a loop, to me, that's a wonderful thing. So I do a lot of advocating for our local composting as well as doing our own.
Awesome. And Duncan had a question if you use the goats for weed control.
Not in a major way. I have to say that they're a little bit more pets, but we definitely use them around the property. So we are an 8.5 acre property, and of that 8.5 acres, we've only got 2.25 acres of field space, and the total farm we consider sort of 3 to 3.5 acres once you think about like the compost piles and the nursery and the barn and all of that. Whoops. I went back where the tractor is. Oh well, good deal. Okay, just trying to give you different things to look at, different aspects of the farm.
Oh yeah, sorry, I froze for a second. I'm back, I think. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And then Faith had a question about your seeding and transplanting strategies. If you could share a little bit more about that. Yeah. So I guess the rotation maybe and the process for seeding and transplanting, or some of the timeline.
Absolutely. And if you guys have interest, I can walk up to the nursery also. We really, really, really prefer to use transplants. So to seed in our nursery as much as possible. The reason being that then when we transition our crops, taking out, I don't know, I think I've said cauliflower a couple times, so I'll stick with that. Taking out a cauliflower, we can transition from a green photosynthesizing plant to another green photosynthesizing plant within a matter of hours rather than weeks of having to wait for something germinate and then have to deal with the weeds and things like that. I see your note on the nursery. So for us, transplants are as important as possible, and having as large a healthy transplant as possible. We also do some direct seeding. I'm just going to wait for Paul to come by us first, so I don't have to. We do some direct seeding, especially in the winter time, because the crops that grow most quickly when we have fewer hours of daylight are a lot of the cut and come again crops. And you can see some of those here. Like here, I've got a bed of arugula and I've got some mustards next to it and then some spinach. So over the course of the year, I would say only like 5 to 8% of our crops are direct seeded in the field. And we don't want to have that open and bare soil. So what we'll do is we'll clear a crop and then we'll direct seed it with a seeder. We'll use a Jang seeder for most things. Sometimes we'll do by hand. And then we'll artificially cover it. We'll use like an agricultural burlap to cover the soil while it's germinating, And then once it's germinated, we'll just use some row cover to keep it covered. And then from there, we'll let it take over from that point. But the crops that we'll do direct seeded, the biggest one throughout the year is carrots. You cannot transplant carrots. And then in the winter time, a lot of the light greens, and in the springtime, radishes and turnips. So, and I'm walking up to the nursery right now. So any other questions on that?
Awesome. Let me see. Let me scan back. Yeah, and then I was wondering, Elizabeth, you'd mentioned to me yesterday about some of the soil testing results you got back around your soil carbon. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that as we walk along.
Absolutely. I will share about that. Right now I'm walking by several of this is our main composting area up here. So you can see various different piles. And we just had a whole bunch delivered. So ahead of the storm we're supposed to get in, this afternoon we're going to be covering a lot of these piles. So a lot of tractor work today. I'm going to hold that off because I am in the nursery at this point.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Our nursery, I'm in the outdoor nursery structure right now. A lot of things going on. This is where we will be starting our seeds. Not where we will be. We start seeds 52 weeks of the year. And we do use plastic. I know some people are really excited about soil blocks because you don't have to use plastic. We just reuse and reuse and reuse plastic. So this is a little bit messy, but the trays that just came in from another crop being transplanted yesterday, and we will just reuse these. We'll have a bin here that we make our potting mix in. We'll fill them, and then we'll do our seeding here. And then from here, it's going to get a little noisy with all the fans. We do have a covered greenhouse structure, which is this. And so this is where we'll start them. And we just unstacked a bunch. Once we seed, we will actually do this thing where we stack all the flats for about 5 to 7 days, depending upon the crop. And this way there's just not very much fluctuation of temperature or moisture, and they really, it helps them germinate quite a lot. You can see it's underneath our tables. This structure here, this is one of our highest real estate places on the farm. So we try and keep it warm. We do that passively by having, we have about 155 gallon drums of water in here that take in the heat from the day and release that throughout the night. You see there's some cages in here that is for our shoots production, a high value crop that we do in the winter. Keep our community fed, keep our employees, going when it's rainy, even outside. I'm gonna go out of here because talking over the fans is a lot. And so then once plants are germinated and have started a little bit in the greenhouse, then we'll move them out here to this outdoor nursery, and then eventually out into the field. We do our crop planting a little bit differently than many farmers who will do it once a year, in the winter time, and then they stick with it. Our crop plan is much more of a, we know that we need to sow, 45 flats of lettuce every week. We know that we need to sow beets every 4 weeks, and brassicas, like a cauliflower, every 3 weeks. And we'll keep on those strategies and then throw in some of our seasonal ones, like tomatoes need to be started, the first, second week of January, and Brussels sprouts need to be started, early mid-July and things like that. So there's, when can we do our first, zucchini and cucumber and things like that. So it's basically our crop plan is a series of rules. And then we go with that and fill the nursery. And then, we're really much more plant focused rather than bed focused. We don't have a plan that says, bed, field 2, bed, C is going to have this crop followed by that crop, followed that by that crop, followed by that crop. We tried having that sort of crop plan and it just didn't work. Like Mother Nature has different things. Like the pest might get pest might get that crop. That crop might be doing way better than you were anticipating, and you don't want to take it out because it's doing so well. Like, there's so many adjustments. So what we do is we'll do a weekly assessment of what beds are coming free on the farm, and we'll also do a weekly assessment then of what's coming free in the nursery. And we do this dating game where we match the two of them together. We also, in our nursery, we do, very large transplants, and we do almost exclusively these larger 6-packs versus most farmers will do a much smaller one. This gives us, a much larger root base for the plants when it's going out. But it also gives us a little bit more flexibility so that these don't have to go out on Monday or Tuesday. But if they had to go out last week, they could. If they have to go out next week, it gives us sort of a 2-week window so that we can make that dating game work. All about flexibility is so important for us, and working with Mother Nature and what's going to happen. Like right now, we've got this rain coming. We want to be, we are composting. We composted like 15 beds yesterday, and we're probably going to do that again today, but no planting whatsoever. A lot of those are then getting covered up. And then tomorrow in the rain, we're going to be doing the planting when we can't be driving the tractor around. So just constantly being flexible of, we were talking about this morning, we really would like to get some carrots started, but it's too cold right now. We're going to wait for a warm patch, and then we will start our carrots. I just gave you guys a lot of farmers stuff there.
That was awesome. I think people like the dating game of beds and plants. That was a good analogy. Cool. Well, let me see. Let me scan back. Yeah, Faith said thank you. Yeah, so let's see. I mean, we have about 10 to 12 more minutes, and then we'll wrap things up. But I want to touch on the soil test results that you guys just got back recently.
Thank you.
And then we'll look for any more questions that come in.
Okay, super. Yeah, Lainey and I were talking yesterday. So just a little bit of history. Our soil on the farm, when we first started our soil organic matter, we have a sandy loam for most of the property and a clay loam in the bottom. And our soil organic matter when we started was 2.4%. So about half that for your soil carbon, because soil carbon, 57% of soil organic matter is carbon, but that also includes other things as well. The first couple of years as we were doing tillage, it stayed about like that. And then as we were transitioning to getting the tractors out of the fields, that came up pretty quickly. And to the point that by 2000, oh gosh, like 6 years ago, I should say. Let me do it that way. Our soil organic matter was 11%, 12%, even 13%, depending upon the various fields. And some of our bottom fields that we transitioned latest to no-till, those even went up faster. And other farmers that we've worked with who have just started off with us, they didn't have the learning curve necessarily. They learned what we were doing and sort of jumped off. They were sort of jumping up 1 percentage point per year, which was great. We had a lot of discussion. People will say, well, how much of that is stable carbon versus labile carbon? And I've never really known that. And, the feeling has been, well, even labile carbon is great. And I'm still trying to figure this out because we had some soil tests a couple of years ago that showed that the biology is respirating really super fast and it's just actively moving. And, whereas on a lot of farms, you wouldn't want to put a heavy carbon stock on it. We could even put like wood chips on our beds and they just get chowed down really, really, really quickly. And so that had a lot of us thinking, oh, well, then we've got a lot of the labile carbon. And yeah, it's great that it's in the soil and all, but it's not necessarily sequestering it long term. Well, the data that we just had come back with a nonprofit that we work with that's sort of trying to document this on our farm, as well as some friends of ours who have been doing no-till for about 5 years now. They just presented at EcoFarm, and they found that, first of all, in the top 15 centimeters, we've got about 60 tons per hectare of carbon, which we're really excited about. And they didn't have some of the right numbers to look at the 15 to 30 inches and the 30 to 60 inches. But I believe because our soil organic matter in the top 15 inches is really sort of 12-ish%. And then if you look below 15 inches, it's still about 8% down there. So there's still a lot of carbon down there. And we've tested all the way down to 3 feet. So, and we found that the soil organic matter down there is about 3%. So it's definitely moved down, and not by anything mechanical, that's from us, but through the mechanism of the organisms. And they also found that the majority of that carbon was stable, which is just incredible because it's this lush stuff that you can just stick your hands in, and it's so I mean, it's doing so much for us. It's growing 3 to 8 different crops for us. And so I'm really, really excited about that. And they're just really starting to crunch these numbers. So I want to find out what the other farm, Hillview, how much stable carbon they have. They also had really wonderful information where they did it over 3 years, and they showed that ours was just this very slight increase because we'd basically reached a steady state. Versus Hillview, because they've been doing no-till for 5 or 6 years now, but they're on a new property as of 3 years. They had this huge climb, which was really wonderful to see. And I was going to say something else related to all that. What was it? Anyhow, just really excited because, working with the systems of nature, I love the idea of, Mother Nature having positive externalities. She produces something through a tree, and that might produce, fruit and offspring, but it's also feeding other organisms. It's also feeding the soil. Like, there's so much that happens, life begetting more life. And I think a lot of us humans in the system that we've been raised, you don't think that, you think much more linearly. But when you work with Mother Nature, it's amazing what she can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really exciting. That's cool that there's a lot of study and emphasis on what happens over time with these no-till organic systems. And Ayush has a great question that can kind of help us wrap things up, I think. Just what important tips would you give to beginners who want to start their own regenerative farm, and what resources can they look out for to learn from scratch?
Absolutely. Do it. Start something today. Whether it be vermicomposting under your kitchen sink or growing, a head of lettuce in a pot in your windowsill. Like, just start with something. That's the first thing that I recommend. The second thing that I recommend is, learning as much as you can hands-on. And for some people that is, going onto a farm and learning. I was talking about labor earlier. A lot of the people who come through our farm are, hey, I want to, start my own farm. Can I come and work for you for a year? Yeah, do that, because it's going to give you a jump off. And every year we have people who leave and start their own farms. And so if you have that sort of opportunity, do it. Even if it's not 100%, the way that you want to farm, you're going to learn about the markets. You're going to learn about the plants. You're going to learn about the climate. There's always so much that you're going to learn. And also start on your own. And start small and do it well, because with our system of being intensive is really important, but being on it, because if you do too much, say if you have another job and you're only doing this part-time, and you take on doing like a whole acre or something like that, and you can't do it well, the weeds are going to come in, and you're not going to get to planting that crop, and you're going to have bare soil, and so you're not going to be keeping on it. So I would say do far less than you think you can, and do it really, really, really well to learn it well. So do one garden bed, or, if you've got a job, or, just do a quarter acre until you get that down, and then start expanding as you can. As far as resources, read books. There are some great, even like Jean-Martin Fortier, he's got some great books on, market gardening. Just please be very thoughtful about the tillage, because he loves, tilthing and that sort of thing. So just, have a skeptical eye when it comes to that sort of thing. And part of the reason that we continue to do what we do with as much gusto is, we want people, I hear a lot of people saying, oh, but you've got to tilt, and you've got to every once in a while bring in a rototiller. And I'm here to tell you, you don't. You really don't. We don't even broad fork. So we used to, and it's a great transition tool. And you can aerate your soil a little bit. And you can't necessarily jump into where we are, but it can be done.
Awesome. That's super helpful to hear. And yeah, and I think as I've just been spending more time in the pandemic, maybe on my computer, there's like some great YouTube channels as well to follow for those of you who are visual learners to read and see a little bit, and until we can get out in person in more places. Those are some
Yeah.
good things to look out for.
I mean,
Um,
a gardener, but Charles Dowding from the UK, he doesn't call it no-till, he calls it no-dig gardening. He's got some amazing things where, and he really delves down into like potatoes and how are you going to do, potatoes. And he just does a tiny little bit, but you can learn a ton from him on, super specifics.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I know my landlord has tried to become a YouTube celebrity by filming worm composting videos in our garden. So, trying to take advantage of the times. So it's a lot of good videos out there. No
And
dig
the last
gardening.
reference that I just said was Charles Dowding.
Charles Dowding.
He's
Yeah,
in the
I'll just
UK.
put that in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been really great. I'll just kind of wind things down and say a huge thank you, Elizabeth. And yeah, this has just been really fun to see and hear from you what's going on at Singing Frogs. And I think it's just a great resource for us as a Terra community to focus on ways that we can work with Mother Nature in healing the planet and providing positive externalities, thinking about carbon and food and biodiversity and ecosystem health is really an inspiring part of what you all are doing, and it's just been really fun to spend this hour together. So thank you.
Hey, I'm thrilled we were able to do this. This was pretty easy. So would love to do it more in the future. And also happy with anybody if they want to do a mentorship. I'm happy to
Mhm.
just have a one-on-one chat for a little period.
Awesome. Oh yeah, I wrote that in my Slack preface. But yeah, Elizabeth is kindly a active Terra mentor with us, and it's just always a great opportunity to connect and learn. And hopefully, this session will just guide, some more strategic thinking around what's best to learn together. So yeah, so this has just been really really helpful, and good luck with the rains to come. I hope there's not any severe flooding, and yeah, have a great rest of your day, Elizabeth. And thanks to
Absolutely.
everyone for your
Hey, thank you
questions.
all for all your awesome questions. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Okay.
awesome. They were great. Take care, everyone.